Heaven blue eyes stared with resentment and bitterness of disappointment. Her long blonde hair was tangled, her cheek was sore, and blood was caked in the corner of her mouth. She was alone, without protection, without support, and he was with her. He, Damien Keen, Archduke Deus, looked on with contempt, asked how she dared to bring Lillian to tears. His words, that dismissive tone, struck like a whip. And this was her fiancé. He towered over her, clutching to his chest this red-haired wench Lillian who had burst into their lives. Lillian turned to Damien and, smiling softly, whispered that she was fine. Her face and her whole appearance glowed. She had won. After all, Damien has made it clear that his fiancée is nothing to him and means nothing in his life. The feeling he had left for her was no longer love, no longer hatred or hostility, but simply intolerance. She fell in love like a fool at first sight. She didn't give herself a chance. She fell in love with this man and followed him everywhere every day. His green eyes looked on with mock disdain. He mockingly asked if she was tired of following him, even on such a horrible day. And that day, when she had come running in a thunderstorm in the pouring rain, and covered him with her umbrella, and confessed that she just wanted to be near the Archduke, he roughly knocked the umbrella out of her hands, shoved her aside and smirked as he walked past her. This neglect hurt the young, loving heart. Raindrops mingled with the tears that came to her eyes, and he took a few steps and suddenly, gasping, fell to the wet ground. I couldn't breathe. My throat felt like it was being squeezed by a steel grip. Terror gripped the girl's heart for a moment. The fear of losing her beloved erased all resentment, and she rushed to his aid. To get his attention, she cured his illness that he had been suffering from for a long time. The Count's family of Serkia, protected by the imperial family. The power of healing has been passed down from generation to generation, along with the blood. Seeing Aren's abilities, Damien suddenly proposed to her. Aren Serkia was unspeakably happy, even though she realized he had done it to use her. It kept seeming to her that if she tried hard enough, he would look at her at least once. He kept postponing the wedding on various pretexts, avoiding Aren and socializing with her. And the day he was hurt was the only time he called out to her and she was able to touch his body. But it was tolerable until he brought in a girl named Lillian. Damien burst into the room, carrying an unconscious, fragile, red-haired girl in his arms. For the first time he was asking, no, he was begging to cure this girl. And there was desperation in Damien's gaze. Aren couldn't refuse the man she loved more than life. One wave of her hand and the girl was saved. Damien didn't leave Lillian's side until she regained consciousness. He sat by her bedside, afraid to miss the slightest change in her condition. Opening her eyes, Lillian didn't realize where she was. Damien jumped up from the chair he was sitting on and leaned over her. Everything around him ceased to exist. This girl was the center of his universe. Such a sense of joy Aren had never seen on his face. Never had he expressed such or similar emotions in her direction. It hadn't been long since Lillian had come into their lives. It wasn't long before Lillian was in their lives, and one day when Aren walked into her room, she saw Damien leaning over Lillian, kissing her passionately. That's how Aren realized that her feelings were gone. She realized that her 3 years of trying had been nothing but futility. She was simply in denial because she loved this man so much. And now, standing before them, and finally accepting that truth, she told Damien she was breaking off the engagement. Damien was taken aback by such words. He'd long since grown accustomed to the fact that Aren existed unquestioningly nearby, without much indignation or displeasure. But Aren didn't want to be a nuisance anymore, and thus decided to self-distract. After wishing Damien and Lillian a long and happy life together, she took the engagement ring off her finger and threw it away. She turned and walked away, but Damien grabbed her arm to keep her from leaving. He shouted, not understanding what other engagement breakup she'd come up with. What had gotten into her? But there was no stopping Aren, no more of the silly Serkia girl who loved him to death. She would no longer tolerate his neglect. She was furious and it gave her strength. Pulling her arm out, she walked away. From the overwhelming feelings, she did not immediately realize what had happened and what those warm scarlet drops were that flew down her dress, her hands, her hair. She had overlooked one thing, and that was the moment Damien had stuck his sword in her back. He was crazier than she'd thought. Damien wasn't going to let her go, ever. And he thought she'd be a good, obedient girl. He couldn't let others use her powers. Why did Aren fall so foolishly in love with a man who was worse than rubbish? If she went back in time, she wouldn't have done such a stupid thing again. He tore her heart and mind to shreds, and she will do the same. There was a sound, someone calling her, a voice so familiar. She opened her eyes. She was lying on the bed. The sun was shining brightly through the window. Her father was sitting next to her. The atmosphere was peaceful. Nothing reminded her of the events of the day before. He held her hand and stroked it gently, and a long-forgotten feeling of the warmth and care of a loved one filled and warmed Erin. Her father, who had protected and shielded her from all adversity, was there for her. Her father, who had died 2 years ago. Her father excitedly said that it was her birthday, and she was sleeping for so long, and besides, she was sleeping like the dead. His statement surprised Erin quite a bit. Is it really her birthday? What did her father mean by that? Her question amused him. He decided she wasn't awake yet, and smiling said it was time to get up. Erin couldn't tell where was her reality, and where was the dream. Painful memories and betrayal tormented her mind and soul. Was it all a dream? Erin called out to her father, who was standing on the threshold of her room, and asked what year it was today. The father raised his eyebrows in surprise, not understanding what was going on with his daughter. But he did not ask any questions, but simply said that the year was 829 in the imperial calendar, and looked intently at his daughter. Erin couldn't believe that she had traveled back in time to her birthday 4 years ago, and it was now the 15th of June, 829. She looked at her father incredulously and asked if it was really him. This again brought a fit of laughter from her father, and he replied that he was indeed her father, and she was his favorite daughter, Erin. Memories overwhelmed her. Her beloved papa had gone along with a horrible daughter who insisted on marriage, betrothed his greatest treasure to an archduke, and gone to the battlefield, and went to Mum in heaven. And Daddy was in front of her now. Tears sprang from her eyes. This made her father uneasy, but before he could ask why she was crying, Erin rushed to him. Erin threw herself into her father's arms. She wanted more than anything to feel his warmth and protection, to feel that this wasn't a dream or a mirage, that he wouldn't disappear as soon as she opened the gas. She hugged him, repeating like an incantation, "Daddy, Daddy." He held her close to him and stroked his child's head, thinking she was having a bad dream. And when she calmed down a bit, he told her that the cook had cooked everything just the way she liked it, and to get ready and come over for breakfast. Everything was like it used to be when she was Daddy's little girl, and he fulfilled all her wishes, and there wasn't that other life of pain, hurt, humiliation, and betrayal. It could not be a dream. A few past years of her life, from which she had miraculously returned back to this bright, carefree, and happy life. Whatever the case, there's no way she's going to miss this opportunity. The only happy thing is that now Damien is sick, and no one, not even the most renowned doctors, can help him. He still doesn't know that Erin is the only person who can heal him. Erin sat down on a stool and looked at her hands. She wondered if she could use her ability to destroy him. But if she approaches it without any preparation, the one who will be destroyed will surely be herself. She needs to find and recruit someone who can protect her family and go to war in her father's place. She took the hairbrush in her hands and began brushing her hair, thinking about what kind of person might be suitable for this. And there was a man who met all the conditions. The only man more powerful than Damien is Cassadine. Cassadine, a man who, despite being a slave, caught the eye of the crown prince and became commander of the Imperial Knights. In his past life, he had countless nicknames. The God of War, the crown prince's right-hand man, the handsome man blessed by God himself, the sword genius who appears once every 1,000 years. Erin couldn't lose her father in the war again, a man who is stronger than Damien and would return unharmed even if sent to the battlefield. In the entire empire, no, in the entire continent, there would be no one but Cassadine. Erin had made her decision, and her eyes shone with the determination to make it happen. Just now, Cassadine would have to act as a gladiator slave. About a year later, the crown prince found Cassadine and brought him into the imperial family. Well, she will find him before the crown prince, bring him up properly and feed him properly, comb him and make it the sword that will protect her and her father. The past Erin is gone. If it's to protect her and her father, she won't hesitate to use others. On the occasion of her birthday, the table was set in the banquet hall, and the cook had done his best. There were all sorts of delicacies. They sat at the festive table, and Erin was happy to share these important moments of her life with her father. Everything was delicious and prepared with care. Her father asked if there was anything she wanted. After all, today was her holiday, and he had of course prepared gifts for her, some jewelry and dresses, but maybe she had special wishes. And when Aaron said there was something, her father's immediate response was for her to ask for anything, and that was her father, ready to lay the whole world at her feet. She asked her little brother, nonchalantly, like another toy from the shop. At the absurdity of such a request, her father choked on his tea and asked if he had misheard him. Was she asking for her brother? Aaron was dead serious and answered in the affirmative. He couldn't figure out if it was a joke. The younger brother? What did his daughter mean? Did she want him to remarry? But Aaron dispelled his fears by saying that there was no need for that, and she would bring the younger brother herself. She asked me to trust her and to let her wish come true. A request of this nature left this grown man confused. Aaron was the only person he trusted, but suddenly it was about his younger brother, and it seemed silly to him. In the Seville Empire, as soon as war breaks out, one man from each family must go to the battlefield. If you break this law, you may face forfeiture of your title, confiscation of your property, or death. If Sertia takes into the clan the desperate Cassadine, who now lives like a gladiator slave and is almost desperate, will be kept close, fed and treated well. He will become a younger brother who will go to the battlefield in his father's place, thereby shielding him from death. And even if Demian targeted her, he could be at least a temporary measure, because he was the only person who could defeat Damian. Cassadine was a master swordsman who later became the youngest commander of the knights. But her father replied that she, Aaron, was his only family, and that was enough. But Aaron couldn't give up without trying to persuade her father by explaining the strangeness of his words. Wouldn't it be a big problem if the family's healing abilities became widely known? If they brought a strong person into their family, it could prevent misfortune. She had always wished that she had a younger brother to protect her and her father, and it's not like she'd never asked for anything like that before. And these arguments made Count Serkia think. Excited to have broken her father's steadfastness, Aaron promised that she would bring a boy strong and obedient enough to protect their family, and his father would definitely like him. Count Serkia was touched by this kind of reflection from his daughter. He would never have dreamed that she would be worried about such things. He believed his daughter wouldn't say such a thing without a good reason. There must be a deeper meaning behind it. She had been smarter than anyone since she was a child. Hope flashed in Aaron's eyes. She had succeeded in convincing her father, and that was the first step to realizing her plan. Aaron was jubilant, though her father had made a condition. Whether it was a lesser brother or someone else, he must be introduced to the Earl first, and only then would he make the final decision. She threw herself around her father's neck, thanking him for his trust, and never doubting for a second that she could convince him that what he had in mind was the only true and correct plan. Aaron must bring a good lad, for her father will not allow anyone else to set foot on county land. Joyful and happy, she said goodbye to her father and ran to her room to prepare to carry out her plan. Maid Sasha was thrilled when she walked into Aaron's room and saw her. Aaron stood in the middle of the room. She wore a dress of sky blue and white that made her eyes sparkle like two sapphires. Her blonde hair, softly curled, fell to her waist, making her look romantic. She needed to match the jewelry to the outfit, and Sasha helped her with that. She chose a sapphire necklace and earrings. Aaron thanked Sasha for her help and was ready to leave. Sasha wondered where Aaron was going on her birthday. But Aaron couldn't tell her about the place she was going to, and just told her there was one thing to do. The carriage stopped near a huge building with many balconies and boxes located on all floors of this structure. The footman opened the door, informing her that they had arrived at the gladiator arena she had requested, and helped Aaron out. Aaron saw a huge number of people near the entrance, all gathered to watch the gladiator fight, because Cassadine would also be performing today. Fortunately, there were no imperial family members in sight. She needs to seize the initiative and do it before the crown prince does. Aaron walked straight to the entrance of the arena and asked to be escorted to a place with a better view. The crowd stirred, shouts of displeasure coming from all directions at her for taking the cue. The footman handed Aaron a pouch filled with gold coins, a fortune, and she handed it to the man who charged admission, saying she'd give him enough money. The cashier was amazed at the amount of gold coins this girl had promised him, and as an apology for getting in without queuing, she paid for the tickets for all the other people. Her family was incredibly wealthy and she could afford it. In exchange for the imperial family monopolizing the healing power, the Sertia clan received imperial protection and accumulated wealth from generation to generation. Of course, this fact remains a secret that only the imperial family knows about. However, Erin broke an unwritten rule and revealed the secret to Damien. She showed her abilities in vain. She was taken advantage of and eventually died. But she would not make such a foolish mistake again. She was led to her place and left. Erin looked out from the balcony of her box. The whole arena was in view. There were so many people. The lower seats were full. She heard scraps of phrases of conversation and heard that some people had come just to look at that guy with the silver hair, like her. He looks good and yet he fights incredibly well. Erin stared, trying to get a better look. It was accurate to say that more than half of the audience here had come to see just him. There's Cassadine. At last she saw him, tall with silver hair and expressive eyes, violet in color. Erin was amazed. That guy was a gladiator slave? He was the most beautiful man she had ever seen. A feast for the eyes. But what was looks if he was a gladiator slave? Suddenly, an announcer's voice sounded over the arena, announcing the start of the spectacle that everyone had been waiting for. There were shouts of approval from the stands. Who will be the last survivor of all the slaves? Before the performance began, the announcer began to explain the rules. The rule was that the weapon belonged to the slave who took it first. Erin was stunned by such a thing. To kill all the opponents and stay alive until the end. They don't even consider slaves as human beings. If they're useless, they're sold here and disposed of that way. The announcer finally announced the start of the match, and the stands howled with anticipation of the spectacle to come. The slaves rushed to the pile where all kinds of weapons were piled. Each tried to grab something more worthwhile than the other, and only Cassadine remained standing where he was. He looked through space and was unwavering. The gladiatorial slaves grabbed their weapons and began slaughtering each other. They turned into beasts, trying to kill their own kind and stay alive. Everything human had left these people. They had no other choice. Kill to survive. The beasts were also in the stands. They screamed, howled in ecstasy, demanding more blood and death. Erin felt uncomfortable and covered her mouth with her hand. Even knowing that slaves were treated worse than cattle, seeing it in person, there were fewer and fewer slaves in the arena. And now there were only 2 of them left. A gladiator with a sword, who rushed at the unarmed Cassadine with all his legs. He jumped up, bringing his sword over him, and growled for him to die. The gladiator swung his sword with force, but Cassadine was nimbler and faster and dodged the deadly weapon with lightning speed. He snatched the sword out of the gladiator's hands so deftly that he didn't even realize the moment it happened. The crowd in the stands fell silent. It was a decisive moment. Cassadine struck back and the gladiator fell dead. He stood with his sword in his hand in the middle of the arena, which was covered in blood and littered with the corpses of slaves like him. The stands exploded with cheers. People chanted his name. Erin sat brooding in a chair. Her footman asked if she enjoyed the show, but she didn't answer. The announcer ran up to Cassadine, who stood still without moving, and shouted the name of the winner. Such strong and beautiful slaves are extremely rare. Whoever names the highest amount will get to spend a hot night with him tonight. It was a bidding war. He was being sold like a commodity. This was something Erin hadn't expected. She was horrified by this reality. Cassadine stood with his head bowed, staring at the floor. His face and clothes were stained with the blood of the other gladiators. And from the stands, shouts of bids were heard, and the bidding began. 100,000 gold, 200,000 gold, 100,000, 200. People were stretching their arms and shouting at the top of their lungs, trying to outshout the others. And then someone shouted 500,000 gold. The stands fell silent. The announcer looked around and said that 500,000 gold was the last bid. Would anyone else like to make a bid? Erin raised her hand, and in the silence that ensued, 5 billion was clearly heard as she said 5 billion. Erin repeated her question about whether 5 billion gold would be enough to buy him out for good. The announcer was speechless when he heard how much Cassadine's ransom was offered. He was not the only one. All the stands looked up at Erin, and she waited without losing her composure for the answer to her question. And finally, the announcer came to life saying, stammering, that of course that was more than enough. Erin waited for Cassadine to be brought in. So far, everything was going according to plan. She managed to intercept him from the Crown Prince. She ordered a carriage to be brought, and as soon as Cassadine was brought in, they would leave the place immediately. There was a knock on the door, and Cassadine was ushered into the room. He quickly retreated, wishing them a good time. Erin turned round. Cassadine was standing in front of her. He was silent, his gaze lowered to the floor as he unbuttoned his shirt button by button. She stretched out that she wanted to talk, but what he was doing confused her. A broad, muscular chest showed first from beneath the unbuttoned shirt. Aaron came to her senses and asked what he was doing. But Cassadine didn't realize, wasn't that why she'd bought him? He continued by saying that right now he was going to spend the night with her, and still without looking at her, he began to release the ends of his shirt from his trousers. Aaron protested and demanded that he stop. She hadn't bought it to spend the night with him. But he stood staring at her in bewilderment, not knowing what she meant or why she had bought it. Aaron started buttoning his shirt herself. It took a skillful mix of facts and lies to put his guard down. She lied that she couldn't look away from his eyes, which were crying out to her for help. Saying she read that desperation in them, she took his hand. I was horrified to see that my entire arm was scarred. Some of the scars were very old, and the skin was already white, and some were very fresh. She led him to a couch with candles and a box of ointment on a table, and sat him down on it, while she sat down on a chair opposite, and continued her story that she had originally intended to ransom him and set him free. But then, you could be dragged back into the gladiatorial arena and turned into an amusement toy. And dipping her fingers in the ointment, she covered his scarred hand with her palm and healed it. Cassadine was amazed he didn't understand what had happened or how such a miracle was even possible. He looked at his hand from every angle. He had forgotten it had ever been like this, without scars, without blemishes. Aaron explained that it was a magical ointment, secretly passed down in their family from generation to generation. Cassadine, calling her mistress, asked why she had used such a precious thing for him. It was, in fact, an ordinary herbal ointment. But to him she replied that no matter how precious the ointment was, it was nothing compared to a human life. Cassadine divined that he was someone who had killed countless people and was hardly worthy of the attention she was giving him. He didn't kill people because he wanted to. It was an inevitable choice for him to survive. Cassadine's family had all died long ago. Left alone, he began to wander and eventually ended up in the arena. That was his story. Cassadine looked at Aaron and in turn wondered who she was, his mistress. And Aaron revealed that she was the only daughter of Count Circia. Her mother died shortly after giving birth to her. A conversation ensued between them, and it was revealed that Cassadine was 18 years old, 2 years younger than Aaron. And Aaron asked him, how about being her little brother? Cassadine was surprised and asked Aaron again, did she really say younger brother? He hadn't heard it? Because it was impossible to believe. But Aaron nodded affirmatively and said exactly what she said. To get rid of his slave status, he would become a member of their Earl family. Then he wouldn't have to live as miserably as before. He wouldn't have to kill others to live. No one would dare to neglect him. She used every argument and reasoning, describing to him all the advantages of such an offer, and smiling she held out her hand to him, asking if he would become family to her. Cassadine hesitated a little. He found it hard to believe in such luck, but in the end he hesitantly replied that if the mistress wanted it. He held out his hand to her in return. She took his hand in hers and introduced herself again, Aaron Circia. Mistress Aaron Circia, Cassadine repeated after her, but Aaron, squeezing his hand with her own, grinned and said he shouldn't call her that formally. They would be family now, after all. Cassadine lowered his eyes and thought, his gaze clouded, as if he were making a difficult decision and weighing it all before finally making up his mind. Aaron watched him at that moment. She wanted to understand what he was thinking. The well-being of her family and her father's life depended on his decision. Nunim. Cassadine said the word, then repeated it again. Finally, raising his face to Aaron's, he thanked her by that name, noting that she was indeed a very kind person. Aaron felt vile from using this man for her own purposes and playing with him. However, she only took Cassadine into the family to protect herself and her father, so she doesn't care what he thinks. Pushing away all remorse, Aaron smiled again and led him to where he really needed to be, her precious little brother, who would be her sword and shield. Cassadine agreed. He followed her into her new life, realizing that she would use him as much as he used her. They made an unspoken pact in hopes of getting what each of them needed. Count Circia was furious when he learnt that Aaron had brought a gladiator slave into the house. And not just brought him in, but demanded to make him a younger brother. They appeared before him as soon as they arrived from the gladiator arena. Aaron was unfazed. She knew it would be like this and she was ready for it. He strode into the office and she followed him. It was going to be a difficult conversation. Her father tried to reason with Aaron by saying he was a slave. He would have thought she was crazy to even ask her to make him an escort knight. But a younger brother, what was she even thinking? The Count was about to kick Cassadine out. Aaron looked humble, for she had not really told her father that she would bring a slave. Aaron apologized for her willfulness and asked her father to think carefully. If war broke out, the father, as the only male in the family, would have to go to the battlefield. But this could be avoided by simply adding a man to the family. The Count hesitated for a moment. Meanwhile, Aaron continued to persuade him that he was an outstanding man who could return alive and well even if he went to the battlefield. Her father was astonished at her words. Had she really been thinking about this all along? He cupped his hand around his head. Was she really worried about such a thing alone? Aaron was afraid her father was unwell and rushed to him. But his father asked to be left alone for a while. He needed time to collect his thoughts. Aaron didn't mind and went out into the corridor. She had to get her own thoughts in order. I had to think about how to behave. It was time for sunset. The sun was setting over the horizon, illuminating everything in scarlet red. Aaron looked out the window. A red sunset. It was the same hour she had died at Damien's hands. She healed his heart, and he pierced her with a sword. Those human-like bird cries reminded her over and over again not to forget who she died for. If only to give Damien back her pain in multiples, she couldn't miss Cassadine. He should absolutely be made her little brother. Aaron found Cassadine in the room he had been assigned. He must have had time to wash and change, because he looked fine. Cassadine was helped into his camisole, and it was immaculate. Aaron thanked the servants and, thinking he was hungry, asked them to prepare food and bring it to the room. When everyone came out, Cassadine said that it all looked strange, but Aaron assured him that on the contrary, the problem was that it suited him very well. And finally, this room had found its master. But could someone like him receive that kind of treatment? He was uncomfortable. Aaron walked up to him and, taking his hands, asked him not to talk like that. After all, she had brought him here. He was her family now, and there was no need to worry about his father. She could convince him. He called her Nunim again, and promised to be sure to prove her worth. Aaron agreed with him, and said that if he needed anything else to just tell her about it. Cassadine asked for a sword. He was a little uncomfortable without a sword in his hand, probably because he had lived with only a sword for a long time. He didn't need anything else. In truth, it all seemed like a dream to him now. And he said only one thing, that he liked her, Nunim. Cassadine took her hand and confessed that he couldn't take his eyes off her from the moment he saw her. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, saying that if this was a dream, he hoped he never woke up. But even if she leaves him, he will never hold a grudge against her. He's desperate, a beast that has been choosing his words very carefully since the very meeting. Indeed, what he has survived for so long has a reason. He looked at her with pleading eyes, begging her not to leave him. But she assured him she had no intention of doing so. Aaron decided to tell him all sorts of cute, silly things to make him feel comfortable, and she would be his silly little sister. Gentler and warmer than anyone until he opens up to her. Telling Cassadine that her room was next door and that he could come any time, she wished him a good night's rest and left. Aaron, sitting in bed, was reading a book. It was a book about healing and poisonous herbs that only grow in the north. It would be difficult for a non-healer to get such a book. 9 years. Around this time last year, the Emperor's illness was cured, making the Serchia family even richer. And the aristocrats whispered that we had a secret mine. And at the age of 20, at a prince's birthday banquet, she met the Archduke Damien. He was like a magnet, tall, black-haired. She lost her head as soon as she saw him among the crowd of other young men. His green emerald-like eyes were so beautiful and cold at the same time. A huge amount of money ended up going directly to Damien. And eventually she met a sad end. Aaron couldn't forgive him. She craved revenge. She extinguished the candle and lay down under the blanket. A month to go until the prince's birthday banquet. More information was needed to confront Damien. The north is Damien territory. You can't miss a bit of information. A voice came from behind the door. It was Cassadine. He had something to say to Aaron and asked to come in. It was late, but Aaron let him in. He came in and closed the door behind him. He was wearing a dark, floor-length dressing gown, open at the chest, revealing a muscular chest. Cassadine said apologetically that it was late and it wasn't polite at this hour, but he couldn't sleep. He went into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. She had told him to come whenever he wanted, so he took the risk of being rude and came. Aaron assured him that it was nothing. She was still reading a book and had just laid down. She invited him to sit down next to her. Cassadine wondered what kind of book she was reading and read aloud the title of The Herbs of the North. Aaron was amazed that Cassadine could read. The cost increases as goods become scarce. There were many things that had to be learnt to survive, like reading and writing and etiquette. Slaves in this empire are just commodities. The more a slave knows, the harder it is to control him. In the civil empire, slaves do not have the opportunity to read, let alone learn to read. But Cassadine read the title of this book very naturally and ordinarily. There's no need to ask him that. Obviously, he's still wary of her. It must have been hard on him, but she promised it wouldn't happen again. Aaron didn't expect Cassadine to say that he couldn't sleep because of the excitement, and if she didn't mind, he would like to sleep with her. He leaned towards her, and she squirmed into the pillows, clenching her fists in surprise. A picture of him beginning to undress as he was led to her after the battle came before my eyes. He's probably testing her. He wants to know what she really bought it for. Then you just have to prove she doesn't need it. And Aaron, pulling back the edge of the blanket, invited Cassadine to lie down beside her. When they were comfortably settled in bed, Aaron suggested that he must be restless to sleep in a new place. Cassadine replied that it bothered him too, but much more. The people he was forced to kill appeared in his dreams every day. Bloodied, they seemed to crawl to his bed, whispering why they were the only ones who had to die. Aaron tried to justify him, saying it wasn't his fault, and he knew it. Though it doesn't change the fact that he killed. He didn't do it deliberately to protect himself. It was the first time he had ever been told such words. Aaron decided to change the subject, asking what kind of life he had led before he became a gladiator. It was just an ordinary life. Very boring, he thought there was no point in even telling. Aaron hoped he didn't dwell too much on the past, so he wouldn't have to endure the pain of festering wounds alone. In the future, she promised, only happy days awaited him. Cassadine intercepted her hand and said that there was only one person exuding light in the arena then, and that was her, Nunim. But up close, he realized that she glowed even brighter. As he fell asleep, he thanked Nunim for getting him out of there. Aaron didn't hear his words. She slept like a baby. The clock on the bedside table showed 5 minutes past midnight. Aaron was asleep, but through her slumber she could feel his gaze. Cassadine lay on his side and regarded her. Her eyelashes fluttered, and she took a glimpse to make sure he was really looking at her. Cassadine lay on his side with his fist resting on his head and looked at Aaron. His gaze was focused and intense. Aaron felt his hand touch the hair near her temple, trailing a strand behind her ear, exposing her neck. The girl all inwardly tensed. What to expect from this man who had been mutilated by life and whom she had brought into her home? Cassadine bowed over Aaron and wishing Nunim pleasant dreams left. It was quiet. No footsteps were heard, but she lay still for some time. She was afraid that he had not left, that he was still watching her from a distance. It wasn't until some time later that Aaron opened her eyes, and only one thought was in her mind, that Cassadine was a liar. Just as she wears the mask of a sweet sister, Cassadine wears his mask. Aaron sat up in bed. She realized he'd been through a lot in the gladiatorial arena, so it wasn't surprising. She didn't expect him to trust her right away. She'll just wait until he naturally becomes part of their family. At the prince's birthday banquet, he will inevitably run into Damien. Until then, Cassadine should be officially added to the family registry and tamed well. Trouble was, she didn't know anything about Cassadine. Even turning over memories from her past life, all she could recall was how they had once met eyes as he stood silently beside the prince. We should look into his background. She would do her best and give him anything he wanted, asking only for his own in return. In the morning, Aaron was met by Sasha, the maid, and told that Mr. Count was calling for her. Saying she was on her way to her father's, Aaron asked Sasha if she had seen Cassadine. He wasn't in the room. Sasha faltered and replied that he was in the study with the Count. When Aaron entered the office, the first thing she saw was a prone Cassadine in a bloody suit. Terror was reflected on her face. The Count stood in the middle of the study with his arms crossed over his chest, staring at Cassadine. Father took the pouch Cassadine had brought, pulled out some leaves and smelled them. There could be no mistake. It was the smell of the sedge he had spoken of. Aaron was puzzled. not understanding what kind of sedge he was talking about. Isn't it a medicinal herb that only grows in caves on the steep cliffs to the west? Rumor has it that monsters live in the caves. Why did Cassadine bring it? Father turned to Aaron and told her that he had spent all last night thinking about Cassadine. He had thought a lot and made a decision. If Cassadine passes safely the tests the Count assigns him, then he will recognize him as a member of the family. The first test was passed, and his father decided to give him the second at once. Aaron, surprised, asked him to wait, walked over to Cassadine and leaned over him. She asked anxiously if he was hurt, but Cassadine replied that he was fine. The blood on him belongs to the monsters in the cave. After calming down a bit, Erin turned to her father and said that she didn't think more trials were needed. Whatever they are, Cassadine can handle it. Didn't father make sure of that when he got that herb? Cassadine has already proven its worth. So she asks her father to allow her to register Cassadine as her younger brother. He is sure to become their pride. Aaron was worried that while Cassadine was going through all the tests, they wouldn't be able to register him in time. And so she told her father that if he didn't want to accept him because of his slave status, then let her be kicked out of the clan as well. Count Circia was furious. She was his only daughter. He couldn't believe what she had said. Cassadine, too, was as surprised as the Count. Was this girl so attached to him that she could give up everything overnight? Tension choked even the air in the study. The Count and Aaron stared at each other in a silent duel. She has no other choice, even if she looks like an impulsive child. She can't keep wasting time with registration problems. Her father told Aaron that her words were breaking his heart. He walked over to his daughter, took her hands, and asked her why she was so fixated on this slave. It's not just the face that counts in people. Aaron looked past her father. She said he liked herbal tea, and it was the slaves on the farm who grew it. Most of the slaves on the plantations are former aristocrats from other countries. Trampled by the empire overnight, stripped of their titles and property, they are now forced to live as slaves. The title is such an insignificant thing. Cassadine listened to Aaron, and it seemed to him like a dream on a summer night, like a sharp frost in the middle of winter that could disappear in the blink of an eye. Cassadine is as human as we are. Aaron continued her thought. She asked her father to let her keep and register Cassadine. And Count Circia gave in, saying that there are no parents who can defeat their children, and he belonged to such. He let Aaron do as she wished. The girl threw herself around her father's neck, not knowing how to thank him. She rejoiced. And Count Circia asked that she never speak of leaving the family again from now on. His heart sank at her words, and Aaron sincerely asked her father for forgiveness. She loved him more than life and did not want to upset him. And when the passions subsided a little, Aaron called Cassadine to them and asked him to take care of them. He moved closer and told her to take care of him too, and again he called her Nunim. Aaron's father was confused and weirded out by the way Cassadine had named her daughter, but Aaron asked him not to dwell on it. An atmosphere of joy filled the office where the three of them were. Aaron felt herself moving one step closer to her goal. Evening came. Cassadine was in his room. He was immersing his scarred body in the bathtub, and he thought about what Aaron had said. How she'd begged her father to let her register Cassadine. How she'd threatened to leave the clan. His gaze drifted into the distance. It was as if he was remembering someone, and he repeated the name again, Nunim. His body relaxed in the warm bath water. He closed his eyes in pleasure and exhaled, Nunim. Apparently the man with that name was dear to him. He thought back to Aaron's impulsive act today. He wondered what she was like when she was angry. So far, she was acting like a cranky child. He knew she hadn't slept last night, but had only pretended to. Well, he had nothing against this girl. After all, he only had one target. He's just going to use her. To use everything he could to achieve his goal. The look was one of determination and detachment. Aaron headed into town. Since Cassadine had said he wanted the sword, it was worth giving it as a memento after being accepted into the family. She stopped in front of a weapons shop. This sword looks pretty comfortable to carry. Aaron picked it up, and the salesman complimented her on her choice, saying she had a trained eye, and it was a great choice. And he told her the story of this sword, for it was not just any sword. They said it belonged to the crown prince of the ruined kingdom of Chiron. And Aaron wondered why then such a precious sword was not for sale, gathering dust on the shelf. It was the price. When the seller voiced the price, Aaron realized why he hadn't been sold yet. But she thought it would suit Cassadine, paid as much as the salesman said. In the evening, she went to Cassadine's room saying she wanted to give him something. But the room was empty, and she called his name. Cassadine came out of the bathroom and saw Arin standing in the doorway. He wiped his wet hair with a towel and was surprised that she had come. Arin said she called out to him and he didn't answer, and she got excited. She wanted to give him the gift as soon as possible, so she walked over and handed him the box. She asked him to open the box soon and see if he liked her choice. Cassadine pulled back the top cover and saw the hilt of a sword with the crest of a wolf's head. His eyes flashed. He took it in his hands and asked in amazement, "Where did she get that sword?" Without noticing his reaction, Arin said they were selling it in a tent nearby, and she bought it, thinking of him. But the sword had no sheath. Cassadine knew for a fact that this sword had to have a scabbard. Arin wondered how he knew. But Cassadine explained that usually such swords came with scabbards. Moreover, it was strange that such a good sword did not have a scabbard. The seller said they were long lost, and retold Cassadine the history of the sword, adding that it was most likely from the kingdom of Khairan. "I see." Cassadine stretched out with sadness in his voice and longing in his gaze. Arin thought he was upset about the lack of sheaths and offered to order the sheath separately. But Cassadine replied that it was not necessary. He had dealt with different swords in the arena. Even without a scabbard, there would be no problem. "Besides, it's a gift from Nunim," said Cassadine, smiling. "He's happy enough as it is." She responded by congratulating him on the fact that he was now part of their family. He thanked her in return, saying that she was too generous and that meeting her was the greatest good fortune of his life. If it weren't for her, he would still be in the gladiatorial arena. He hugged her, saying he didn't want to lose her warmth. There was only one person he saw in the arena, and that was Nunim. She looked like an angel coming down from heaven. She didn't trust him, but thanked him for becoming her family, and noted that siblings don't usually hug like that. He joked back that he couldn't remember how long it had been since he'd felt this warm and apologized for his mistake. So it was a mistake? How entertaining. She realized he was playing her, and she supported the game by saying that he could lean on her at any time if things got tough. And she thought how silly he thought she looked? Well, let him keep thinking she was a nice, silly girl. Arin told him that if he couldn't sleep, she would sing him a lullaby. And when the day was clear, he could go to the garden to admire the flowers. The days ahead would be filled with nothing but happiness. Just as the paint spreads on the water, slowly submit to me. Cassadine asked if he could come to her room again, and Arin laughingly said she would hold his hand until he fell asleep. Cassadine asked with a chuckle, "Is this what brother and sister usually do?" And Arin suggested, "Then let's not be regular brother and sister. Where's the end of this weird sibling game?" At night, as they lay talking, he asked why she was so eager to accept him into the family that she was willing to leave it herself. She reminded him of what he'd said last night, about how he wouldn't be angry even if she left him, so she wasn't going to leave him. But also, because when he asked me not to leave him, he looked like he was about to cry. She wanted to make him happy no matter what. Cassadine replied that he was already happy, very much so. Wishing her pleasant dreams, Arin decided to just sleep tonight and let Cassadine's guard down that way. That night she dreamt of Damien. He pierced her heart again with his sword. Arin woke up on a crumpled bed, her hair spread across the pillow. It was a nightmare. She sat up in bed. It was heavy on her mind. Cassadine had left in the night. Her eyes locked on the bookcase. Something was wrong. Arin noticed that one book was missing. Before she could think where the book had gone, the maid Sasha entered the room. The girl could see that Sasha was extremely excited, and as she approached the bed, she was burning with curiosity, lost in speculation. The maid moved closer to Arin and whispered that it might be strange, but perhaps Cassadine wasn't a slave originally. Arin perked up at such a statement and asked to explain in more detail what she meant. Sasha barely managed to meet the slave trader who was the one who found Cassadine. He said that when he first saw him, he was lying on the road alone and in expensive clothes, so he immediately thought he was an aristocrat. Yeah, he said he distinctly remembered where he found him, and what the first impression was didn't seem like a lie. This discovery made Arin think that nobility was not something that could be learnt by imitation, unless one was born noble to begin with. She remembered Cassadine saying he had no family. They were all long dead. You should treat him even better in the future. Arin put her hand on the jewelry box. She took it in her hands, opened it, and took out a necklace and held it out to Sasha. The maid took a step back and shook her head. Arin didn't think she had enough to offer, but Sasha refused to take the jewelry because she wasn't doing it for the reward. It was enough that she was useful to her mistress. cried Sasha. She had been worried lately because Aaron wasn't like herself, and she began to apologize for her intemperance. But Aaron smiled at her and told her she was grateful. She had been very tired lately. No wonder the maid thought so. And that meant that Sasha cared for her a lot and was worried about her. She did a good job, so Aaron let her rest today. And Aaron also wanted Sasha to keep that jewelry box for herself, and she didn't want to accept any protests from the servants, telling Sasha to take the jewelry box and go to rest. To herself, she thought to herself, it would be strange not to be changed by going back in time after death. However, the first one to notice it was Sasha. Cute. If only Duke Damien's mansion had one such maid. But he wouldn't let her take a single maid. She was a bird trapped in a golden cage. He was only affectionate when she treated him. The forsaken bride became the perfect prey for the subordinates. On the day of the prince's birthday banquet, when she met Damien, what expression would she have on her face? Aaron stood near the bookcase and held onto the spot where the missing book stood. This is the garden of the Serkia family. Aaron and Cassadine strolled through their garden. It was very beautiful here. Cassadine especially turned his attention to the blue roses, noting that they looked like nunim. Aaron was puzzled. Cassadine explained that, unlike red roses, blue roses were very valuable. In the language of flowers, blue roses mean impossibility. To that extent, they are difficult to nurture. He also saw them in person for the first time. So beautiful to look at, Cassadine continued to marvel, just like her, nunim. But Aaron said that no matter how beautiful a flower is, it will still wither, no matter how valuable it is. What good is a rose after it blooms? And she plucked a blue rose flower and held it out to Cassadine. The moment it fades, it becomes the gardener's problem. There was sadness in Aaron's sky-blue eyes. Cassadine, taking the rose from her hands, said he didn't mean that. Aaron knew, just wanted to say, that comparing people to flowers could be offensive depending on who the words were addressed to. Cassadine pinned the rose to his camisole, thanked Aaron, and said he would remember it. By the way, Aaron changed the topic of conversation and said that she had a book missing from her shelf. Did Cassadine happen to know where it was? But he feigned surprise. Aaron lamented that she didn't even know who would take her. Well, she's not really important. A book he had seen earlier. The title was Of the Herbs of the North, and Cassadine offered, if Aaron would let him, to help her find the book. Aaron thought he was the only one who could have taken her while she slept. The liar who came to her room every night. His beaming smile, his words about the blue rose all lies. Ever since they met, he's been wearing a mask around her. What a bad manner. Then why was he so loyal to the crown prince? A succession of peaceful days followed. His father officially welcomed Cassadine into the family. In return, he made it a condition that he would never reveal his slave origins. Aaron and Cassadine spent every day together walking through the city, or the park, or the garden on their estate. They heard scraps of phrases. Look how handsome. Looks like some aristocrat. Is this really the face of a man? Aaron watched it and thought that no one would ever think it was a slave. One day she asked him who his parents were. And Cassadine replied that his father was a good-natured man, and his mother was tougher than anyone else. But they were good people. He had no brothers and sisters. He was alone. Cassadine said that he liked to walk with Nunim outside the manor like this, and she reciprocated. Those were days filled with peace and happiness, and Aaron asked if there was anything he wanted or needed. He took her hand and brought it to his lips. He didn't need anything. He wanted to stay close to her forever, and that was the only thing he wanted. Aaron was very pleased to hear that. It had been a long time since she'd had such peace and tranquility in her life. The Crown Prince's birthday banquet is coming up in just over a week. Every year, the Sertia family is invited to the event held at the Imperial Palace. This time, Father will not be able to attend because of the land survey. Cassadine had a flicker of an idea that he would go in the Count's place. It was his wish. It was important and necessary for him. On impulse, he wrapped his arms around Aaron's waist and pulled her to him, asking her to take him with her. He said that he would be in the Imperial Palace and that his Nunim might be stolen. They were standing in the middle of the street, and such an expression of emotion caused the shopkeeper near where they had stopped to be surprised. Aaron put her hand on Cassadine's shoulder and said that she was going to go to the banquet with him anyway. And to reassure Cassadine, she added that no one would try to steal her away. But he countered that she didn't realize how charming she was. Aren became upset and pulled away from him, saying she would do anything he wanted so he would stop checking up on her. Cassadine looked puzzled, not knowing what she was talking about. It was the first time he had felt such warmth from her, and he liked Nunim. That was all. He had never checked her out, not once. But Aren decided to clear things up and asked bluntly why he had stolen the book that had gone missing 3 weeks ago. First he stole it from the cupboard and then he put it back. She knows. Cassadine squinted his eyes and realizing Aren wouldn't believe him, but still said he hadn't stolen the book. Aren's blue eyes stared inquisitively at Cassadine. He was the only person in her room that night. Did he think she didn't realize it was him? Cassadine didn't look away. He stared wide-eyed straight into Aren's eyes and listened to her. He must have had a reason, Aren continued to say. It wasn't the fact that he had stolen the book that mattered. What mattered was that he was lying to her. She brought her hand to his face and stroked his cheek. Cassadine put his hand around her wrist and said, "If she knew it all along, why didn't she accuse him?" Their hands intertwined and Aren responded because he was her precious family. Suddenly, Cassadine squeezed her hand with force, his gaze becoming glassy. But this change lasted for a few seconds, and he smilingly let go of her hand and confessed, saying that Nunim was like a saving ray of light. From now on, he would never lie to her. Aren was willing to give him any book he wanted, and even if she didn't have the right book, she would find it for him. He explained that he was just curious what kind of book she was reading, and if he had known this was going to happen, he would have told the truth right away. They continued on their way after explaining themselves. Aren reiterated that she would do anything for him, she just needed to know what he wanted. And when he said there was something he wanted, Aren was very curious to know what it was. Cassadine gave her a playful look and said he wanted her, Nunim. Aren smiled back at him and thought that she shouldn't have expected a normal answer from this guy. Since that day, Cassadine had not come to her bedroom for some time. On the eve of the prince's birthday banquet, Aren read the newspaper that Archduke Demian Kindius was the winner of the 829 fencing tournament. Aren's attention was consumed by this news, and she wondered how that damn monster could win a tournament with a body like that. Who in their right mind would think he had a heart condition? Even she only found out about it when she saw him fall with her own eyes, and this despite the fact that she had been following him around for a year. There was a knock at the door. It was Cassadine. He asked for permission to enter and Aren said to come in. When he came in, Aren asked why he hadn't been coming in at night lately. Cassadine looked at Aren, trying to figure out why she was asking. Was it simple politeness or... And he asked if she was expecting him to come. He climbed onto the bed and she said she had been waiting. After all, he had said he couldn't sleep, so now nothing was bothering him anymore. He lay down under the blanket and replied with a smile that he was happy that Nunim was waiting for him, and that thanks to her, he was less bothered by nightmares, but still he was most at ease around her. Then she said that he would come back to his place in the middle of the night anyway. Cassadine objected that if the others found out, she would be in trouble, so he would leave before dawn. In that case, Aren remarked, if he really didn't want her to get in trouble, he wouldn't come home at night at all. He liked to see Nunim during the day, but he also liked to see her at night. Her blue eyes were like a calm lake, and her face was illuminated by the soft moonlight. And as if reading her thoughts, Cassadine reached out to her and told her that he was always thinking of her. Aren made herself comfortable and said that a few days ago, a man had been seen leaving the mansion at night, and after some pause, asked where he went at this time of night. Cassadine replied that he was just going for some fresh air. Did he really think she would believe that? Sasha, who had seen him leave, said that Cassadine had returned to the mansion just before dawn. But she had no choice but to say that if he said so, it was so, and wishing him good night, Aren went to bed. So passed a night full of lies, and came the morning of that very day, full of turmoil and preparations for the upcoming ball. Aren wore a dress, a blue top with open collarbones and white lace, delicately framing the shoulders, a slit from the waist from which flowed the snow-white fabric of the skirt, embroidered with a lace pattern. The outfit was complemented by white gloves embroidered to match the skirt. Her neck was framed by a necklace of several strands of diamonds, with a large sapphire in the middle. It effectively set off her large eyes, and they sparkled like diamonds. Sasha kept chattering about how she was sure to be the main character of the banquet tonight, and she was jealous of the man who would dance with her mistress. But noticing Aaron's hesitation, Sasha asked if she didn't like the dress. Aaron smiled and said that everything was fine, and she was happy and grateful for everyone's help. She thought that Cassadine, not she, would be the main character of the banquet tonight. They were conducted to the carriage that was waiting in the courtyard, and wished a good journey. Cassadine gave her a hand to help her into the carriage. His manners were as good as his appearance. He was gallant and courteous. As they got into the carriage, Aaron indicated to Cassadine that the seat across from him was free, and he could sit down, and her hand could be released as well. But Cassadine said he wanted to stay like that, and laying his head on her shoulder, said that there was a nice scent coming from Nunim. He wished he could stop time. There would be a lot of people looking at Nunim in the palace, and he wasn't comfortable with that. But Aaron thought he was being insincere and lying, and she said he was overdoing it with the jokes. And his good-natured reply that he wasn't joking finally made her mad. She pulled her hand out and asked him why he was acting like this, because they were brother and sister. Outside the window, children were running around the field, carefree and free of burdens. Aaron realized that Cassadine would not answer as he always did. She wished, however, that one day he would open up to her and tell her the truth. She shifted her gaze to him and asked, was that too selfish of her? There was an awkward silence in the carriage. Yet Cassadine asked her if she really didn't believe him. But Aaron wanted to be honest. She was tired of this game, and she told him that when he lied, the corner of his mouth lifted, and his eyelashes on the right side twitched finely. His lies are rather clumsy, Aaron summarized, glancing at him askew. Cassadine wanted to answer her, but only asked with a mocking smile, what kind of person was she? And Aaron interrupted him by saying they had arrived. The carriage stopped in front of the palace entrance. It was time to get out and go meet the man from her past life. Aaron had been to the palace since she was a child, and the fact that their estate was close to the palace was also made to be able to heal members of the imperial family at any time. Because of this, rumors even began to circulate that she was a possible candidate for the crown princess position. Cassadine looked out the window at the palace and stretched out in puzzlement. That finally arrived, as if the journey had taken forever. He stepped out of the carriage and put up a hand to help Aaron down. She intercepted his astonished look and asked if he wanted to say something. But Cassadine smiled and said for the umpteenth time that it was just that Nunim was very beautiful. And she remarked to him that he was paying her especially many compliments today. And she said in return that he was beautiful too. But that wasn't enough for Cassadine, and he said he'd appreciate it if she'd tell him he was attractive. And Aaron agreed, so be it. He led her to the entrance of the palace. They walked up to the entrance. They were met by security, and Aaron showed the letter of invitation. The Imperial Guard inquired who was escorting her, and Aaron noticed that the entire guard garrison was looking at Cassadine. In addition, from all sides came surprised fragments of phrases. Who is this man? God, what a handsome man. He has never been seen before. Aaron came to her senses and replied saying it was her brother, Cassadine, Count Cercia's family. Well, the guard was satisfied and gave way to them, asking them to pass. They entered the hall. The floor was covered with red carpet. Knights stood on either side, and the hall glittered with many lights. It was the Imperial Palace, the Crystal Hall, It was just as she remembered. The tables were bursting with hors d'oeuvre. Champagne in glasses stood in pyramids on the tables. The guests gathered in groups and made small talk. Damien is late for tonight's banquet. The only difference now is... Nunim heard Aaron somewhere nearby and turned her head in his direction. He asked what she was thinking about. About what? Ah, yes, the difference was that today she came with Cassadine. Lady Christine was the first to approach them and greeted Aaron, saying it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Aaron replied that she was glad to meet her too, and Lady Christine was honored that she remembered her. Of course Aaron remembered. Evely Christine, daughter of the Earl Christine family who got rich mining diamonds. They killed hundreds of slaves in their mines, and they spread rumors that the Cercia were hiding the mine. All because Aaron had jewelry that she didn't. But Evely wasn't particularly interested in Aaron. She kept her eyes on Cassadine, and when finally the formal greetings were said, asked who it was next to Aaron. Cassadine said hello, and after saying his name made a slight bow, and Evely didn't fail to notice that he even had a lovely voice. Arin explained that Cassadine was her younger brother. Little brother? The echo echoed through the hall, and more people began to gather around them. Arin was surprised. Usually they were talking and laughing among themselves, but now they were surrounded like a pack of dogs on the hunt. Questions came from all sides. Arin heard someone say that Lady Circia was the Count's only daughter. The brown-haired woman in the green dress suggested that Arin rarely appeared at social events because she was hiding such a beautiful little brother. Arin was annoyed. Why had things turned out this way? She just didn't want to waste mental energy on a pointless fight. The exclamations of how such a beautiful man could be hidden were drowned out by the question of whether Cassadine had a lover, and it was Evely who asked it, shoving away the brown-haired woman in the green dress. But she did not give up so easily, and said that if Mr. Cassadine did not mind, she would like to invite him to her mansion, which made Evely clench her fists and ready to attack her. Cassadine ended their argument by saying that he is not in a relationship, but he has a man he keeps in his heart. And that statement surprised even Arin. But it was Evely who was most annoyed. She couldn't help but ask, and who was it? Cassadine recalled that the day he met her, she was wearing a light blue dress with open collarbones and a sapphire necklace around her neck. Arin listened in amazement as Cassadine recounted their first meeting, saying he couldn't take his eyes off her because she was so beautiful. Taking his eyes off her made him feel guilty about it. His heart belonged completely to her, and there was no room for anyone else. Arin couldn't believe it. And at that moment, it was announced that His Highness the Crown Prince was entering. Everyone turned round to greet the prince. All hailed the little son of the Empire, Léon de Crassibel. He was tall, slim and trim, his cheeks flushed, his copper blonde hair slicked back. His beautiful almond-shaped brown eyes with amber flecks radiated joy and confidence. The Crown Prince expressed his gratitude to everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules to attend the banquet. Arin bowed respectfully and thought about the fact that Cassadine was originally supposed to be the Crown Prince's retainer. But it was the best choice to protect her family, but she can't help but feel guilty towards him. The prince, meanwhile, continued his speech. He raised a glass of wine and suggested that for today, we forget about hard work and have a little fun. Everyone raised their glasses, and in return, thanked His Highness and wished him prosperity in the future. Everyone raised their glasses and sipped from them. Arin saw the triumphant smile on Cassadine's face. He was looking over the glass at the prince. This caused great surprise, but Arin was unable to observe Cassadine further as an incomprehensible commotion rose in the hall. The prince suddenly coughed. He couldn't breathe. He collapsed to the floor senseless in a second. Everyone rushed to him, trying to bring him to his senses and find out who dared to do such a thing. Someone had definitely put poison in His Highness's glass. There was panic all around. Arin couldn't understand what happened in the past life. The Crown Prince wasn't poisoned, not the banquet. The banquet lasted late into the night, Damien arriving late, and the only difference from that time so far has been... Arin remembered Cassadine wondering when the Crown Prince's banquet would be held. How he'd asked her to take him with her. Arin looked at Cassadine. He stood with his hand covering his mouth, and she could see through her fingers the smile playing on his lips. Cassadine, but why? Arin was horrified at her guess that he was the one who had killed the prince. The same Cassadine who had served the Crown Prince more faithfully than anyone in his previous life. His words that he had no family, they had all died long ago. And the sword she had given him was familiar to him. It belonged to the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Chiron. Cassadine. If he's the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Chiron, which has completely disappeared from the map. However, in his previous life, he was the Crown Prince's closest aide, for 3 years as well. Then what did he poison the prince for? That's it. Revenge. Arin stared at Cassadine, trying to read the answers to her questions. How much did he have to suppress that desire within himself? Feeling the need to hide everything behind an outer shell, she seemed to be able to understand quite well. Arin touched her hand to Cassadine's palm and whispered that it was him. Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Chiron. Cassadine slanted a glance at Arin and with just one lip asked what she had said. A guard came out into the hall and announced that from now on no one would leave these walls until the interrogation was over. Outrage began in the hall, but the guards quickly closed all entrances and exits. It is the Emperor's order that a criminal could be in this hall. If anyone behaves suspiciously or tries to leave here, they will be considered guilty. So the culprit is among the aristocrats? What kind of madman would do such a thing on His Highness's birthday? The crowd continued to murmur here and there. Shouts of outrage could be heard. Aron covered Cassidine's hand with her palm. He trembled. That trembling in his hands was not from fear. He's mad at her. She's harboring a wild animal. Aron whispered to him that it was okay. Just don't do it again. She was advising him to do it for his own good. Cassidine looked at her perplexed with disbelief, as if not understanding what she was telling him. And Aron promised to protect him. The door opened, and it was announced that she, Aron Serkia, was being invited by His Highness the Emperor. A whisper went round the hall. Aron looked encouragingly at Cassidine and walked towards the Emperor. As they walked through the corridor out of the excited crowd, Aron thought that now rumors would start to spread that she would be the prince's bride. Cassidine brought her in with a surprised look. He too didn't understand why out of everyone present, it was Aron who was called first. Aron entered the room. The prince was lying on the bed. The Emperor was sitting on a chair leaning over his son. Aron greeted the Emperor. The worried father rushed to Aron and begged her to heal his son. Aron walked over to the bed where the prince lay, examined him, and concluded that he was pale, which meant the poison had already spread. She leaned into his lips to smell the poison, but the poison had no smell or color. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to concentrate. Putting her hand on the wrist of the prince's arm, she tried to understand what was going on in the prince's body. The poison poisons the blood throughout the body. It is strong and fast-acting, and odorless and colorless. Aron's eyes widened when she realized it was poison from the crow's eye, a plant found only in the north. In the book Cassidine had stolen, it was written that by mixing the juice of the crow's eye with jade, one could rid the poison of its odor. If we delay, the prince will be bedridden for the rest of his life. The poison is deadly. Cassidine is insane. Aron rushed to undo the buttons on the prince's clothes. And when his chest and stomach were freed from his clothes, she put her palms on his body and made every effort to save him from death quickly. Slowly, warmth began to spread through the body of the poison-bound prince. His face faintly began to pinken. Aron had completed her work. The prince had not yet regained consciousness, but his life was no longer threatened. She turned to the emperor and, wiping away her tears, said that she had removed all the poison. Turning gray with excitement, the emperor thanked Aron for her help. He told her that she had relieved him of his grief and could ask anything for her favor. But Aron replied that she didn't need anything. She had only done what she had to do. The emperor was tormented by the question, who dared to do this on Leon's birthday? Whoever this madman was, he obviously wanted to die. Aron thought how good it was that she could heal, and she said she was able to find out what the poison was. The emperor was ready to listen. He wanted to know everything. Aron hesitated a little, but it was the only way to save Cassidine, and she said it was poison from the crow's eye, a plant that only grows in the north of the country. She decided to deflect suspicion onto another person. The northern territories were ruled by the emperor's younger brother. At his death, he left his only heir, Demian. The poison of this plant was too strong to be detected only by its smell, but if it was mixed with jade grits, the smell would disappear. She only needed to plant a seed of doubt in the emperor's soul. His father was never interested in the throne, but Damian was different. One day he came in covered in blood, and when Aron asked who had done it, he said he had business at the palace. Even after the prince was named heir to the throne, Damian never looked him in the eye. He was the most likely person to make an attempt on the throne. The emperor loves his son very much, and therefore, although Damian had been able to avoid the first suspicions, he would not now escape the emperor's interrogation. The emperor thought for a moment. Aron says she's done her job, she should leave. But the emperor said he had a favor to ask of her. Could she stay here while his son recovers? He can't lock the aristocrats in the hall and not come out to comfort them. Since Cassidine is now above suspicion, she will do his majesty's bidding. Handing the crown prince to Aron, the emperor left the room.